What's up, boys and girls? This is Pete Clark here, and in today's video we're going to get our teeth into the 5 principles of bluffing. When to bluff, when not to bluff, how to bluff, what sizing to use, it's all answered here. Let's take our win rate to the next level by understanding this fundamental part of the game. You know, bluffing is one of these things that it's incredibly difficult to get right. It's like walking a tightrope. On the one hand, if you do it too much, you end up that maniacal spewy player, whereas on the other hand, if you get into the habit of not bluffing enough and missing mandatory bluffs that you have to make, you end up really butchering hands quite quickly. So today's video is all about how to find that balance, walk that tightrope correctly, and pick the right sizing for your bluffs. Let's go. Our first principle today is a bit of a counterintuitive one, but the goal of bluffing is not to maximize fold equity. That's right, you heard it here first. The idea is if you were buying a hotel room for a night, or you were buying a holiday, or maybe you're buying like a new car or even a new house, it wouldn't necessarily be correct just to try to get the best hotel possible, the most luxurious vacation that you could imagine, or the most amazing Aston Martin possible. Rather, the best car for you may be a cheaper one that's quite efficient and just costs a tenth of the price of an Aston Martin. The best holiday might be something that's cheaper than an all the way around the world cruise. Just like with bluffing, the more you pay, the more you get. So when you invest a bigger bet, you get more fold equity, but it's not always correct to max out on what you're getting. You have to think about the risk part of the risk-reward equation as well. And that's why all kinds of bluffs can be viable. The main thing that's important for bluff sizing is that you have a value region that can support that size. So if you're over betting 2x pot, it's important that you have a few value hands that you would also want to choose that size with when you're building your strategy. Let's take a hand example. So in this first hand, guys, we have Jack 9 of spades in the big blind. Button, who appears to be a recreational player, opens to 2.65 BBs, and we go ahead and make the call. On the flop, we check and villain checks back. Turn, I think leading is an option. These pair draw hands, more on that later, are okay to lead out here with at some frequency, but we'd want to split our range up a bit here, sometimes wait until river, sometimes bet turn, sometimes not bluff at all if we have a hand with worse blockers or higher cards like king high or something like that, but I think jack high is very often going to be betting by the river. We do check here and villain checks back a second time. At this point, I think the population's range is a bit too capped. I'm not sure that they're good at bluffing their total air on the turn at high enough frequency, nor am I sure that a recreational player is going to have enough slow plays here, enough value hands. So I think bluffing river here is fairly automatic. The queen is not such a good card for range, but we do still have some value bets. And when we think about the various value bets that are in our range here, they actually come in all shapes and sizes. On the one hand, we have things like boats that we slow played again on the turn, or flushes that are very, very good. These hands can, as we saw in the last video, the 5 principles of value betting, these hands can bet very large indeed. They can overbet the pot, 2x pot, whatever you want to make it really. A hand like Queen X can also bet quite big here. Something like Queen 10 is comfortably good enough to bet 75% pot, which would be my second biggest sizing in my strategy here. And a hand like Jack 9 is really bluffing, and it could choose any size it wants. However, a good bluff size here to use sometimes is just very small, like this. And this makes a lot of sense because we also have hands like 5x, pocket 6s, pocket 8s, pocket 4s, ace deuce, hands like this that are not doing fantastically well. Now ace deuce is probably too far actually, but a lot of these 5x and 6s and 8s hands, which are going to just want to choose a small sizing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with going for thin value as long as you keep your sizing small, and therefore some of your bluffing region should go this size. I'm not saying this is the best bluff size to go, it may well be, exploitatively, but theoretically we should use this bluff size sometimes. And the reason for that is just that, well, it won't work very often, but when you're risking 1/5, 1/4 pot, this is about 22% pot, you're not looking at needing to pick up very much fold equity. For example, when you bet third pot, you only need 25% fold equity. When you bet quarter pot, you only need 20% fold equity. So this bet size being a bit less than quarter pot is only looking at picking up about 18% fold equity to already be breaking even here. So as long as villain is getting to this river with plenty of king x and ace x combos that he's willing to fold at some frequency, he doesn't even always have to fold an ace. And it wouldn't be correct to guess at whether he's going to fold ace high here. Some people will, some people won't. The idea is that we should comfortably get enough fold equity to make this bet better than checking. Checking should be worth basically nothing here against a competent player, because they should be bluffing everything that would actually lose to this hand. Villain is not meant to show down 8-6, and on this note, not at all. So I just want to open your mind to the idea here that smaller bluffs are okay. It's okay to make a cheap investment and accept that it's not going to work very often, just as it's okay to book a budget hotel with the aim of saving money, or to buy a cheaper car with the aim of just getting a car that can run you from A to B without unnecessary expense. So some of our bluffs are cheaper and they work less often. Some of our bluffs are more expensive and they work more often. But at the end of the day, as long as we have a value region that wants to use each of these sizings, we should include bluffs sometimes. I'll finalize this hand by saying that we do want to be careful that we don't overdo the small bluff here. And the idea there is that when you're using a very small bet size, you want to have mostly value hands in your range for that sizing, because villain only needs 15% equity to call here. So technically speaking, the vast majority of our hands should be value bets for the sizing, but when I roll a certain number on the random number generator, or I think it's just the best play exploitatively, I will use this sizing with a bluff wherever I have a value range that can do the same thing. Let's move on. Hope you're enjoying today's video, guys. If you're looking to boost your pre-flop armory, why not check out our pre-flop solved ranges? These are built with very high accuracy and tailored to the rake structure that you play. You can choose anywhere between 10 NL to 500 NL rake, and make sure that the charts you're looking at have already factored into account how much rake you're paying per hand. Our basic package contains 65 of the most common and important spots in the game tree. That's available for $79.99 at carrotcorner.com, and the complete package goes into all kinds of weird and wonderful situations on top of those standard bread and butter ones, teaching you how to build squeezing ranges, how to play cold 4-bet ranges, how to play 5-bet jam ranges, all sorts of things, and that one is $129.99. This one you see on your screen right now is how to play the big blind against a cutoff 2.5. As you can see, the charts are very clear, easy to follow. You don't have to follow them exactly. We do encourage you to think for yourself. They're just a very solid baseline. Now let's get back to the 5 principles of bluffing. Guys, this is the most important tip anyone will ever tell you about bluffing. If you are a less experienced player, if you're playing micro stakes or something like that, you may not know this, or you might, but there are certain spots where you have a big range advantage, so where your range is strong or stronger than your opponent's, but your hand is weak and you're on the river, so it's the last chance for bluffing. In these cases, your theoretical fold equity, so the amount of the time that your opponent is supposed to fold to your bet, will go way up, and that's because his range is much weaker than yours. In these cases, you must bluff. In the Carrot Poker School, we refer to this particular part of the game tree as river blunder theorem, because it's a blunder to actually check on this node when your range is strong and your hand is really weak. Let's take an example of one such mandatory bluff. So this is one such hand where we have to bluff the river that I played recently. We have King 4 of hearts in the big blind. Small blind opens to 3x and we make the call. Really standard. This hand's a bit too good to turn into a 3-bet bluff and far too good to fold. Villain bets 1/3 to a quarter pot, and we have a fairly close decision. I think when you're in position against this very small sizing, certain hands like King High backdoor straight draw that wouldn't be calls out of position can become calls. I think continuing with a call here is fine, but it'll be very, very close between calling and folding in terms of EV. Our showdown value here is a bit more than it looks though, and there are definitely times when we can get to river and win with King High. We can also improve, and we're getting a very good price in position, so calling is okay. Queen turn would certainly be folding to a bet at this juncture. I think here we have slightly too much showdown value to be bluffing. That might not be true actually. Like, this is again very borderline between turning into a bluff and not turning into a bluff. I elected to check here though, which I think is normal. There's still a decent amount of the time that we win at showdown here. I think something like King 9 would definitely be a check. King 4 is notably closer. River is the 5 of clubs, and villain checks again. So what's happened now is we've actually got to this river with one of the worst hands we can possibly have in our range. So as you remember, the ingredients to this must bluff scenario are that we have a strong range and a weak hand. So let's start by talking about how weak our hand is. For us to have a weaker hand in this, we'll have to have called flop and then not bet turn with something like Jack 9 of spades, Jack 10 of spades, Jack 8 of spades, 10 9 of spades. We can have hands like this, but they're very few and far between in our range. You'll note that most of our bluffs have actually got there. Any flush draw, any 3-4, 4-5, 3-5 combo has now hit. Any float that we made on the flop, meaning light call with queen high, has hit the turn. And we have tons of ace-x, queen-x flushes and stuff like that. So we've basically got here with a very strong range. Meanwhile, our opponent has c-bet flop and then checked twice. That's a very, very weak action sequence in theory and in practice. And his range here is going to be lots of king high, jack high, pocket pairs, some 5x, deuce x, that sort of thing. Just weak, mostly capped, maybe a few slow plays in there, but that's okay. And I think humans fail to check a flush here as often as they're supposed to, theoretically, to go for that elusive check raise that we talked about in the last video on value betting. But the main point here is that our range is pretty strong. It's much stronger than that of our opponent, and our hand is about as bad as it can get. Therefore, the EV of bluffing here, no matter what sizing we pick, will be better than the EV of checking. And that's because our opponent's range is gonna have to fold more than that break-even point, because he's not meant to get here with a range that's strong enough to meet that so-called minimum or mathematical defense frequency. He is not meant to try to defend, you know, half his range against a pot size bet, or 1/3 of his range against a half pot size bet, sorry, 2/3 of his range against a half pot size bet, or anything like that. He's just going to be folding much more than that. So, mandatory bluff. The sizing we pick here is not super important. We would have hands that want to bet this sizing. We have hands that maybe want to bet a bit bigger as well, like pocket fives, ace five, or a good flush. I wouldn't bother with a small bet here in position. I just don't really think it's worth reopening the action against a reasonable player here with that sizing. And if I want to value bet ace x plus here, I can certainly go this size. Something like king queen with a club can probably also go this size, although it's a lot closer. So yeah, I think this is a very important concept to be aware of. Times when you simply must bluff, when not bluffing isn't a choice, it's a blunder. So bear this one in mind. Weak hand, strong range, got to bet the river, it's your last chance. Okay, my third point today on bluffing is that you can bluff with pair draws on the turn, especially on low boards. I don't think I've coined this term. I think this term exists somewhere else, the concept of a pair draw. The idea with this is that, well, we talk about gut shots, we talk about open-end straight draws and flush draws, we talk about semi-bluffing them. If we're on a low board, especially like 5-5 deuce, 9 or something like that, and I'm considering double barreling the turn, queen 10 or jack 10 or something like that, or even jack 8 or jack 7, these cards are very, very live. Whenever your two unpaired cards, by pairing the river, would actually make a very strong hand, you want to consider bluffing. You don't want to hold yourself to this really arbitrary standard that you need to have a flush draw or a straight draw or something like that in order to bluff. As long as your range is doing okay, you can bluff with almost anything, and you don't even really need your pair draws to be that good on the turn. Let's take an example of a spot where it's really standard in theory to bet with a pair draw, but where many people playing lower stakes may just miss this entirely. In this next one, we open the cutoff and we get called by the big blind. The flop comes 7-6-6. With two hearts, and we flop two overs with the backdoor straight draws and flush draws. Not going to be a board I see bet that frequently. 7-6-6 is typically fairly bad for my range. It's actually even worse if it's rainbow, because then I don't get to make big flush draws to dilute the fact that he has more 6x than I do. But in general, this board is still going to warrant some betting theoretically. I'm not going to use a big sizing on this flop because my opponent's range has a nutted part that's quite abundant here. He can have a 6 very easily, and that really negates the amount of massive pot building my range wants to do with its monopoly on the over pairs like jacks, queens, kings, aces, etc. So small bet standard here. I think check is also viable. Billing calls, the turn is the ace of clubs. This turn is alright for my range. It's definitely one of the better ones. It's actually not as good a turn as something like a king, queen, jack, or 10 would be. Maybe the 10 is a bit marginal given that he can continue lots of 10x and 8-9 and stuff on this particular flop with the straight draws, but the jack through to the king are certainly cleaner and nicer turn cards for my range. Essentially here, my range is going to love cards that miss his flop calling range, that basically hit the cards he would have thrown into the muck against my flop c-bet, right? So with jack 10 here, we do want to be bluffing things other than just obvious draws here. If we only bluff 8-9, flush draws, 10-9, etc., we actually end up under bluffing, or in other words, betting with a range that's too strong, too high EV. So we do want to bet a hand like jack 10 at some frequency. That's especially true when we have a heart, because we're going to block his very strong calls, such as ace jack of hearts, king jack of hearts, or a hand that may bluff raises, like Jack 10 of hearts, Jack 9 of hearts, something like that. So definitely betting here at high frequency with this hand is good. And I want to reiterate, this hand is a pair draw. And the reason for that is that many of the hands that we'll call this turn bet we're about to make here are going to be pocket 9s, pocket 10s, 7x, pocket 8s, 5s, maybe 5s is a fold, but there'll be plenty of hands like that in villain's range, or also something like the king queen of hearts, the king 10 of hearts, the king 9 of hearts, the queen 10 of hearts, hands like this too, that have a little drop of showdown value and a flush draw. So given that the jack of diamonds or something would just be like a live card against much of that calling range, we have a pair draw. It's not a draw to a hand that we're going to be able to value bet the river with, so it's not as good as having a flush draw, but that doesn't make it less of a bet than having a flush draw. Because what's really important when you're bluffing is that you understand how good the EV of bluffing is compared to checking. It's not actually in your interest to go and compare this hand to some other hand that's much better than it, right? It's a bit like saying, okay, right now I have $200, that's rubbish, I'm going to discard that because I'd rather have $1,000. Well, we don't have a flush draw here. We don't get the option of transforming our hand into a flush draw, so we want to make the most out of our $200. We want to make the most out of the resources we actually have, and betting with this hand is going to be totally fine. If we do hit the river on this occasion, sadly we don't, we will be able to check back and sometimes win against the likes of 8s, 5s, etc., 7x when it's not a 7 river, that kind of thing. So the jack and the 10 are live for part of the pot on the river, and being able to check back and just scoop a nice pot, sometimes with second pair, shouldn't be totally neglected, right? It's a relevant thing. This time, villain decides to donk lead the river. We have an incredibly easy fold. This is an awful spot for a range, and I'd imagine a fairly underbluffed situation. Never going to go chaotic here and start raising, especially with the jack of hearts in my hand, so easy fold. But yeah, an interesting concept that on the turn it is in our interest to bluff hands like this that are pair draws, especially if we block his continuing range by having this jack of heart. Look out for these ones, guys. They're a bit less obvious, but they're very important. My next point, guys, is that you should bluff the river when your air hand has nothing to do with a dry board. So what I mean by dry board here is that draws didn't get there on the river. We don't have a 3 flush or 4 flush, essentially, nor do we have like a 4 straight. So we have some kind of texture where the strong hands are still pairs or 2 pairs or trips or sets or something like that. No flushes get there. And the main candidate hands to look out for in a spot where things break off by the river are the hands that don't interfere with the misdraws, right? Your opponent will be calling your flop and turn bets usually with hands like flush draws and straight draws. So when your hand has nothing to do with the board, you just have like random low cards that he would have folded earlier that just don't interfere with his bad stuff, he's going to be folding the river more often. You want to unblock that folding range of your opponent. You want to have cards that have nothing to do with the stuff that he got here with that then missed that he'll now be folding. If this is a little confusing, don't worry, we'll take a hand example and we'll clear this up. We'll see exactly what we mean. So here we have an open from cutoff, and we call the king 5 of diamonds in the big blind. 10-4-3 two-tone is the flop, one that we're just going to be check folding on, but our opponent does check back this time. The turn comes to 6 of diamonds, and my normal strategy when I am probing the turn, this is called a turn probe, guys, is to use a very big sizing at a fairly low frequency. The idea is that on most flops and turns, when my opponent checks back the flop, he still keeps his overall range advantage. Yeah, his range is a bit more capped now. He doesn't have as many combos of sets over pairs, good top pair, that sort of thing, but he also doesn't have as many combos of trash either, because he's meant to bluff the flop quite often with air. So in theory, my opponent's range remains pretty strong here, and I want to be a bit careful with what I lead. Now on the 6 of diamonds turn, this is quite a good card for big blind, so big blind can be a bit more adventurous than normal on a texture like this, and certainly a hand like king 5 that has lots of outs to improve and can get lots of better hands to fold and has a live overcard is definitely good enough to bluff. I think both bluffing and check raising are totally okay here at some frequency, and I would alternate between those two options. Because I don't want to be check raising super often, it's a very expensive way to invest, and only the strongest value hands will want to invest that way. I'll actually be just making a slight overbet here more often than I'll be check raising, but those will be the two plays that are really options for our hand here. Villain makes the call, and we go to the Queen of Diamonds river. Now, let's go back to our point for a second. We want to bluff with air hands that have nothing to do with a dry run out. So this is a fairly dry run out in the sense that flushes don't get there. There's no four-liner to a straight. It's kind of as dry, not as dry as it gets, but it's certainly up there. It's more dry than wet. What that means is that we want cards that didn't interfere with the stuff that he was calling turn to then fold river. Now the 5 isn't fantastic in this respect because he will have some combos of ace 5 or pocket 5s or something like that that are maybe folding now, but the 5 is actually quite a good bluff catcher for him on the river anyway, because if it comes with a pair, he'll have something like 6-5, 4-5, pocket 5s, and he'll have showdown value. He'll also block some of our straights, like our 5-7 suited. So I think that having the 5 here, it blocks his calling range as well as maybe some of his folding range, like ace 5. But what the king really does here is it doesn't block many of his folds at all. I really can't think of many hands here that villain will reach this river with that contain the king of diamonds that will now want to fold. Most of the obvious folds for villain that are like clearly folding would be hands like ace 9 of spades, ace king of spades, ace jack of spades, stuff like this. Maybe some other draws as well, but usually spades are the ones that we can bank on to be a safe bet for folding here. So having no spade here and having a card like the king of diamonds that just has nothing to do with the board really is going to put our hand on the map as one of our very reasonable candidate bluffs. If we had king 5 of spades here, we would certainly just have a give up holding that very negative king of spades card. Having big misflush draws is much worse than having small ones because they're a bigger feature in your opponent's range, but having no misflush draw at all is going to certainly indicate that you should consider bluffing. We go for this sizing here. This is similar sizing as we could use with a hand like queen jack of spades or ace 10 or something like that. It's not a massive bet, it's not a small one. It's going to be totally fine with some regions of our range. Had we rolled a different number here in the RNG, we would have actually bluffed massive. We would also have a very big sizing here because we have got here with some straights and sets and 2 pairs and stuff like that. So we would definitely have an overbet in our inventory here in our arsenal, but we've chosen not to use it this time with this hand. Villain does fold this time and we get the bluff through, which is nice. Again, looking to unblock those misdraws that our opponent is going to be naturally pitching on the river. Have cards that are unrelated to the run out when you're bluffing a dry board like this one. Hope you've been enjoying this video, guys. This is the last point for today, and it is avoid triple barreling with large misflush draws. We've already kind of been over this, but I'd like to stress this again by showing you a 5th and final hand. So in this one we have the queen jack of diamonds. We open in the hijack. Big blind makes the call. This is a fairly strong and fairly well-known 200 zoom rig. Ace 9-4 is a board that's good for our range. We're going to do a lot of betting here. I would typically use the small sizing on this board, but this is something I've been playing about with recently. Overbetting is also okay here. Kind of annoyed this came up because I'll probably get a bunch of questions about this. It's not the subject of today's video, but I will say that although solvers don't choose this as their primary sizing on this board, there is a way of playing where you make this juicy bet size that's actually theoretically fine. Not a lot of people use this strategy or have seen it before, and I do like to use overbets in places where conventionally other regs don't, so I like to be a bit sort of surprising and have some tricks up my sleeve in these cases. So yeah, don't assume that because this is not something you've studied or seen that there's something massively wrong with it. There isn't theoretically. So we go ahead and make this bet, our opponent calls, we get turn of the 5 of clubs. Our hand is going to be a very frequent bluff here. I think betting and checking are both totally okay with this sort of hand, but we're going to be overbetting here, or if we've bet smaller on the flop, we're going to be overbetting this turn a lot. If we've bet as big as we have on the flop, we don't have to bet as big on the turn. We're already building like a bigger pot. So my turn sizing is generally around this for my range whenever I've overbet the flop. Villain makes the call again, and the ace of clubs comes on the river. So clearly a very horrible run out for our hand, and not the best one for our range either. That ace is making it harder for us to have things like boats here that we could be value betting. So we're going to have to, right off the bat, exercise some caution here when it comes to how often we bluff. The average bluff should be break even in this spot. So if you just came up with some random bluff combo that had totally neutral average blocker properties, meaning how it interacts with villain's range and makes it harder or easier for him to have certain hands, then that hand would be theoretically a break-even bluff. There will be hands that have worse blocker properties than that, and there will be hands that have better blocker properties. Here, a hand with neutral blocker properties would be something like the Jack 10 of hearts. Something with positive properties would be like queen jack with a club and no diamond, and something negative would be the queen jack of diamonds, and this goes back to our rule: avoid triple barreling, avoid bluffing rivers in general with big missed flush draws. If I had a hand like the 3-6 of diamonds here, which I wouldn't open in the hijack, I'm not quite that crazy, it wouldn't be so bad for me to bluff here because he just wouldn't have that many combos check calling all the way to the river that were 6x of diamonds or 3x of diamonds. However, King Queen and King Jack of diamonds specifically are two extremely frequent hands that are going to always call flop, always call turn if they don't raise one of those streets, and then always fold river. I want to avoid making those hands impossible for my opponent. What you're doing with blockers, guys, is that your hand, whether you like it or not, is increasing the frequency of some hands being in your opponent's range and decreasing the frequency of others. This hand is making it less likely that he has the hand that he would fold. That's bad for us, and we want to be very careful. And that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope you've enjoyed the 5 principles of bluffing. We'll be back with more of these poker principle videos very soon. In the meantime, do check out carrotcorner.com for everything else from me. And we do have an intake of the Carrot Poker School coming up this April 11th onwards. Classes will be starting. If you're interested, just head on over to carrotcorner.com/school and sign right up to one of those classes. See you guys soon. Good luck at the tables and enjoy making those river bluffs. Bye for now.